Um, Good morning. Welcome to Parenting with Vanessa Kahlon. Today, we are going to be talking about grief and loss and language with children with this social worker that I met actually in Savannah, Georgia, who I listened to her speak, Regina Cz. If I said that wrong, was that correct?
You're correct.
All right. And I just loved what she had to say, and I had to have her on. So thank you for being here, Regina.
Well, thank you for having me, Vanessa. I don't know if all of you are familiar with the statistics regarding grief and loss, death with children, but it's 1 in 13 right now. So 1 in 13 kids under the age of 18 will lose a parent or a sibling. And then when we look at the post-COVID statistics, they're saying that 72,000 children lost a parent after COVID. So those numbers really say a lot in regards to children struggling with death, grief, and loss. Um, I worked for hospice for many years and realized that that was the missing piece. We weren't working with the children, we were just working with the adults. And I just thought about the children sitting here watching this happen before their eyes and nobody talking to them about it. So I decided to create a curriculum, and it's created for the schools. And I created it that way because that was how we could reach the most kids. So we knew that kids would eventually go back to school, go back to their lives, and it wouldn't still be talked about. One of the things that I ask my audience whenever I do a presentation is to think back to your first loss, and it's usually at a very young age. And the second question I ask is, was there anyone there to help you process it? And most often they say no. And that's still occurring, a little bit less, but it's still occurring. I think because when there's a loss of a parent or a sibling, the grief is so tremendous that the parents can't even function at that point. So the kids are
Right.
kind of left to fend for themselves. So we know they're at school most of the time, and that's the place that we can capture them.
And so
So
this, how many weeks was the I mean, this is actually a very thought out program.
mhm,
And every week is a certain, and anyone can do this program, correct? So like a social
correct.
worker, a teacher, anything else. So, can you go into a little bit more detail on that? Because I saw the books, they were great. And then specific questions for students. Was that correct? Right? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the program is called My Journey, and PCE Solutions, located in Temecula, California, where I'm from, is the one who wrote it with me, published it, and decided to take it out and see what could happen with it. We first started with the Native youth because that was who we were asked to help at that time, with grief and loss and death, since there's a lot of death on the reservation. So we worked with that population first, and then it kind of just snowballed into us creating this curriculum called My Journey. And there's one for high school, and then there's another one specifically targeting elementary and middle school. It's an 8-week curriculum, but they kinda, go hand in hand because we realized that we wanted the kids in one family to be getting the same information. So they're getting it at an age-appropriate level if they're in elementary school, middle, or high school, but it is the same information that they're taking back home in hopes that the family will then begin to talk about it and process it. But in that and working with kids, there was a lot that I learned, that I didn't know in particular about grief. And I think that's the most important piece, passing on the knowledge that I know to those who are going to be working with children in grief, because there's a lot to be said about how kids process grief differently than adults.
100%. Right. And their imagination takes over. And I don't think people, if you have this idea in your mind of something and no one tells you something different, the imagination just goes from I don't know what to what. And it could be the worst thought process for a lot of kids.
Correct. There's this idea that grief can be delayed and we can be stuck in our grief. And that's sometimes what happens with kids. When they don't have all the pieces to their puzzle, they start making up pieces to fit to move forward. And that's where we get them making up stories, which you said kind of can be the worst scenario
Right.
because they don't have the information. So, honestly, honesty is probably the best policy. And I know that's really hard for parents these days because we want to protect our kids and shield them from anything that would hurt them. But honesty really is the best policy because that's the only way that a kid can move forward and not be stuck in their grief. They need the answers. And they don't need specific details a lot. I always tell people who are going to be working with kids to kind of give them what they need. They ask a question, you give them a little bit of info. If they stop asking, then they don't need any more. If they
Right.
continue to ask, you ask until they stop. So they totally lead the conversation with you giving minimal answers as possible.
Can you give me an example of like, because we did talk about, language, and because I think sometimes we don't understand how language could mean one way to you, but a different way to a child.
Correct.
Right. So,
So typically in our society, when we refer to somebody dying, we typically say things like, they fell asleep and they're not going to wake up, or they passed away. That's probably the most familiar one, passed away. Well, when we tell kids things like this, they don't understand because kids are very literal, especially the younger they are, the more literal they are. And I'll share a story with one student that I worked with. Um, he lost his pet dog when he was in kindergarten, and now he's a fourth grader and he's getting ready to have his tonsils out. Well, when we usually lose a pet or a dog, specifically, we usually tell the student or the kid, we're putting them to sleep, right? Those are the familiar words. We're going to put him to sleep. So, in a kid's mind, sleep equals I'm not going to see him anymore, whether
right.
that's death or whatever their perception is. Well, this particular student goes to the doctor to prepare for his surgery, and the doctor tells him the same words, we're going to put you to sleep. Well, what did that tell the kid? Why would you kill me? Why are you going to do what you did to my dog? So, when we're working with kids, we realized that we needed to use the real words no matter how difficult it was. So then the doctor had to go back and explain, no, we're putting you to sleep with medication, but we're going to bring you back. Your dog was something different. That medication was specifically to make his heart stop so that he would die because he was in pain. So there is a lot of explanation that has to go with it. We can't just use phrases like they passed away or they fell asleep and they're not going to wake up, because kids take it literally.
Right. And then I remember asking you, so when I was going in for my master's program, we talked about, you know, children and their thought process, and like how there is a certain population of young kids that want to meet their other part, like other family member that passed on, and that because they have this image that they're going to go and they're successful in it.
Mhm.
I think at that time it was like 0.02 like percent, something really small.
Mhm.
But when you said, yeah, that happens, I went, huh? Like,
Yeah, because when kids perceive death, they believe in whatever their belief system is, but most usually it's that they go to another place. We can call it heaven, we can call it whatever you want. But they know that to see their person again, that they have to go to that place too. And they know that the only way they can go to that place is if they're also dead or they die. So a
right,
lot of kids will say, I want to die so I could be with my mom. Well, that does not necessarily mean they want to commit suicide.
right,
It basically means that they know the only way to see their mom again is for them to die. So we teach them, hey, what other ways can you connect? Because that's what grief is about, connecting and moving forward. What other ways can you connect to mom so that you don't feel like that's the only way to see her, hear her, smell her, feel her? So we use a lot of guided imagery. We teach them to calm themselves, to connect themselves through guided imagery. Um, Also through linking objects, whatever the object may be, that connects them to mom, pictures. But it's pretty awesome when you do a guided imagery with students, even adults. They can really put themselves with their person. And when you ask them while they're in the imagery, what do you smell? What do you see? What do you hear? They can actually answer those things. So we connect with our senses, right? So when we talk about things we see, things we feel, places we've been, things we hear, especially a favorite song, they can actually connect in their brain to their person. And they know that, hey, this is another way that I can be with my person without having to go to heaven.
right. And you can also, once you do that guided imagery a couple times, it's easier to reconnect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's like, 'cause I did that on my master's program over and over again, and so when you're able to, like, connect on that level, through your senses, and that changes everything, and journaling.
Absolutely.
So,
So our curriculum was made specifically for journaling. It is a easy to use, colorful, you can color, there's black and white pages, there's prompts to journal, a lot more in the high school journal, but that's specifically what it was for. So they could do a lot of reflecting, a lot of the processing, because they jump from the day the death occurred to being numb to moving forward. And some point at some point later on, that comes back. And it's
Right.
interesting because when we're working with our middle school kids in particular, they usually have had a death that happened in their elementary years and they weren't able to process it back then. They just didn't have the capacity. So now in their middle school years, there's something that's triggering those thoughts, and then they're able to process it and move forward.
Someone asked a question, to you. I'm trying to remember, but I loved your response when someone comes to you and they want to tell you about their grief or whatever, and like what question do you start with? And you said, "Tell me about your person." That was just beautiful. Like, it was just like, I don't know, that to me was like, wow, that really resonated with me,
Mhm.
as, like, because I think we wanna fix things, right? So if someone comes to you upset, you wanna fix it, you wanna be able to, like, patch it up, and you don't want them to
Right.
feel pain, right? But when you
Absolutely.
just said, "Tell me about your personal," wow, that was easy. That was just one simple line that can open the door for someone just to completely just say it all and be there and be heard.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Vanessa. One of the things is that we don't like to see other people hurt, just like you said, so we want to fix them. Well, when someone's in their grief, they don't want to be fixed. And I learned that from a mom who lost her daughter at a very young age, and she stayed stuck in her grief for many years. We're talking 10, 15 years before she was able to move forward and be happy again, feel successful again in life, whatever that meant to her.
Right,
But she told me that being in that deep, dark place was where she felt the most connected. And it kind of makes sense, right? So when somebody comes to you and they want to talk to you about their grief, they want to talk. Sometimes they just want you to listen. Sometimes they just want you to be there while they cry, just to
right.
comfort them and not say a word. But when they do want to talk, um, they come to you and they're probably in a crisis state, right? They're probably experiencing some kind of discomfort, crisis, feeling uneasy, anxiety, depression, all of those things. So, and to be able to engage them at a comforting level, that's pretty much what I say. Let's start with this. Tell me about your person.
I mean, that is it's just really it was really powerful. It was just I have a mentor who passed away of breast cancer, and I remember and I'm like, "How are you doing?" She's like, "No, the question needs to be, 'How are you today?'
Hmm. Hmm.
How am I today?" And that stuck with me. She's like, "There's ways that you talk to people that are facing their own mortality and what they're going through."
Hmm.
And so then I'm like, "She's right." And then when I heard you say, "Tell me about your person," I'm like, "Okay, right there." I mean, it's just something so powerful, but so small. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not to discount
It's,
it, but
no, it's something very simple that allows them to engage in a conversation while they're really struggling and not feel like they're struggling more or not feel like they're hurting anymore. We're focusing all the positives about the person, right? When I say, tell me about your person, I want to hear all the great things. That's what I'm going to hear, regardless of the life they led. I'm not going to hear the bad things.
right.
I'm going to hear all the good things. So that kind of sets a tone for, hey, I'm safe here. I can talk to somebody. Um, it's just me talking freely. There's no answers to give, there's no questions being asked. It's just me talking. And sometimes that's all they need. They just want to talk. You
Right.
don't need to talk to them back. You don't need to ask questions. Just being there in a moment with someone.
And yeah, that stream of consciousness that comes out, right? So then it just
Mhm,
kinda just all flows.
mhm.
And then afterwards, you're like, "What did I just say?"
Right.
But but it's a
Yeah.
really
But sometimes you want to say, okay, wait, stop. We're done.
Well, having that safe place, and I think a teacher, an educator. I mean, I just think your curriculum is, from what I saw, because I saw the books, and then just listening to your stories, and then the 8 weeks, and how you go through each one, and
Mhm.
just how and also the other thing is too, like how you say, well, this course is not for, I understand deaths of animals, but not is for people, right? So
Right.
when I just want to put that out there,
Yeah.
that comparison of like, okay, well, it's all bad either way, but, understanding, like, how everybody's grieving, and that being able to support one another.
Right. And loss is loss. I mean, when you think about all of the issues that people struggle with, it usually boils down to some sort of loss, right? So,
100%.
in that regard, everything we talk about is applicable to everything, even death itself. But this particular curriculum was made for death. And we did try and do groups where there was maybe an animal or an incarcerated dad where it felt like a loss, it felt like a death, and it just didn't mesh well because the kids who had lost someone were always thinking, well, at least they're there. They're, you at least
Right.
have them, right? You can get another dog. You can't get another mom. Your dad is somewhere, he's alive. So there was this difference, but we did try that initially. But one of the interesting things that came out of it is we don't necessarily think about the loss of a pet as a first death experience, but when you're working with the kids, especially the little ones, that's what they go to. They always want to share. I remember when my dog died, and that tells us that maybe they didn't have the words to say what they were feeling, but now with the death of a person, they're feeling the same thing. So they know. So then we started to put a little bit in there about a pet death and how that is the first death experience. Because we know that a child's first death experience is going to determine the later deaths, and there's going to be many more in our lifetime. So if we can connect on that first one, help them process, give them the tools they need, they're going to do better each time because they know what to expect. So when the person died, that's they already knew what to expect if they had had a pet die, even though
Right.
we don't perceive it the same way.
Right. It's the feeling. Same feeling.
Correct.
Yeah. It's
Correct.
the same emotional connection that you're and the loss on that piece.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
Wow. And then what other tips would you give parents on like language? Specifically, what would you say to a child? Is there anything else that you would want to put in there?
Yeah, I think we use the word loss a lot, and for a kid, especially a younger kid, loss means that you've lost something and you can find it. So when we tell a kid, "We lost your grandfather," they're gonna wanna go look for grandfather because literally that's what that means. So
Right.
again, using the words death and dying becomes so important, and it's really about our own uncomfortable feelings about using those words, right? It's about us, not other people necessarily, especially with kids. So it's important to use the language so that they understand and they're not confused because confusion also causes stress. They're
Right.
already under enough stress. We don't want them stressed anymore or irritable because they don't understand and they're afraid to ask.
And then what would you say for a parent that is just also, going through their own devastation, losing, their parent and then, talking to their child? I know you said this other stuff, but I mean, how on like how to take care of themselves, right? So we're talking about the child, but what about the parent too?
Right.
That
I will
maybe
say this, in working with families where there's been a death of a sibling, a child, or the death of a parent, as soon as the parent is able to get to a place where they're better and moving forward, the kids follow suit. So
okay,
if mom or dad continue to struggle, so will the kids.
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we look at the whole piece of a family, the whole family, we're really dealing with the whole family when we're dealing with grief. So when we're using the curriculum and doing the groups in the school, one of the things as the facilitator, we're saying, go back home and talk about what we did in grief group, because then it opens it up at home. Then home becomes a safe place where they can talk about it, where they can answer questions, and that elephant in the room kind of starts to go away.
You also have there's also we talk about, the loss and everything. Well, again, not loss, but
Death.
that
Right.
but I just did it. Okay, I have to actually do some training myself on this one. But I mean, there's also beautiful memories too that could be talked about. So it doesn't always have
Absolutely.
to, yeah, so it doesn't always have to be, just what your favorite memory of your person was and
Right.
things like that. So I think there's a beautiful way to connect that you can,
Yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah, so the curriculum progresses to that. The curriculum starts with um, what do we think death is and what happens after somebody dies? So that's about a belief system, right? That's about a belief system that comes from what our parents or family tell us, what our religion tells us, and what our culture tells us. So we already have some part of a belief system in us when
Right.
we talk about somebody dying, but we don't really use it or think about it until it happens. So kids know of whatever it is they've been told, and then when it happens, then they start to think about it. So that's kind of where we start in our group there, talking about our belief system. And then it goes on to talk about the feelings related, how do we deal with it, telling our story, because that narrative piece becomes really important. There's students that I've had in my groups who have never told their story out loud. And when we tell that story out loud, it can be very freeing. It weighs heavy on us. But sometimes they think carrying that close to them is the only way to stay close to their person. And we know that that's not the truth. So when they're able to and ready to do that narrative piece, there is a sense of relief, right? So then we go from the narrative piece to what you're talking about. When we talk about moving forward, what does that look like? How do we take our person with us? What does that look like as far as traditions and holidays and how we celebrate them? So it's incorporating it into their life and being able to move forward with that, not just leaving it behind.
Right.
So when
This this has been amazing.
good, I'm glad.
I knew I liked you when I met you.
Exactly. Same with
I'll
me.
be seeing you in Tennessee, I hope,
Yes,
for the next conference. Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, no, this has been great, and this is a lot of great. How can people find you? Because I mean, I just feel like this, even for parent. I mean, do you have a parent one? If a parent just wants it,
No, we don't have a parent one, but what I've done is when we have a family with different age kids and a parent, we do a group together. So the parent is not observing, they're an actual participant.
and you could do this all on Zoom too, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I haven't done it on Zoom, um, only because it's usually with students,
right,
but I'm sure you could. You can do everything on Zoom.
right. Well, I'm just putting it out
Mhm.
there. So, how can
Yeah.
people find you? That's the key thing.
So it's pcesolutions.org.
All right, PCE.
pcesolutions.org. Yeah,
Perfect.
that's our website. There's samples of the curriculum on that website. And if you're interested, your district is interested, I actually go out and train your counselors, teachers, psychologists, whoever's going to be facilitating the group. I train them with a brief description of grief and death and loss and what it looks like at different age levels. But we also go through the curriculum. We do like a mock group, so to speak. And the
Perfect.
importance of that is because if you're facilitating a grief group, you can't help but deal with your own grief while the kids are dealing with it. So you actually become a part of the group more than a facilitator. So it's kind of like this practice run so that you personally know what it's going to feel like talking about your own death experiences. So
Right.
we do all the training. You can buy the curriculum. I can come out and train you. It's pretty easy to follow if you didn't want a training and you just wanted to buy the curriculum. It comes with a facilitator's manual for each one that shows you what to say and what to do verbatimly week by week. So
I
it's that
love it.
simple to use.
I mean, that's what I loved about it. So I was like, okay, this is something that I can easily just do. And
Hmm.
you don't have, in a lot of curriculums, you have to be like a therapist or you have to have all these things, but like that's not always going to be the case, and not everyone can afford it.
Correct. Correct.
So how do we give back on there and work through this when kids need a voice and they
Mhm.
need their voices heard and stuff like that. So,
Mhm.
Regina, this was amazing. Thank you so much for being here, coming
Thank
on.
you, Vanessa. Mhm.
And we'll be in contact. So I'm sure I'm gonna want to ask you some more questions.
Absolutely. I'd love to talk again.
All right, thank
You're
you.
welcome. See you soon.
I see you.